Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Talk Off the Podium. I have Rose Gear with me on the podcast today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
One thing I've been talking to with a lot of my guests, and I've had so many musicians, and you're a musician, but you also do a lot of work on the administrative side. What are some of the things that you've been doing during this time of the past 6 months with COVID and everything happening around the world? What has the orchestra done? What does the orchestra plan to do for the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing that we did is replace our fall concerts with virtual events. So, and this is still coming together as we speak, but I'm really excited about the possibilities. We replaced our October and our December concerts with streamed events. And one thing that Cascade Symphony, which is the organization that I'm executive director for, one thing that we have that's really great is an archive of past performances. So they're not just like audio recordings, but also video recordings. And it goes back 20 years.
Wow.
So this is a huge asset. So we're going to be taking excerpts from those tape concerts and adding in like some other elements like performances by our member musicians that are taped in their living room, whether it's like a solo or a duo or maybe even a small ensemble. Just music that they want to play and share with our audience, and also some stories. I think it's so powerful. We don't often hear from individual musicians about their journeys, but I think through these streams that we're going to be doing, they'll have a chance to actually talk about their lives and share how they got to be, playing with Cascade Symphony. And that's something I'm particularly excited for.
Specific to Cascade Symphony, what is the daily or weekly maybe things that you do for the for the symphony? Because for an organization that size, it's not the New York Philharmonic, but it's also not a very small community orchestra. It's relatively big for a community orchestra. What are your daily or weekly tasks of an executive director? Because I know you're doing so many things to run that position.
I know you know. Yeah, you're probably intimately acquainted with everything that goes on. A community orchestra, but a really skilled one. It really varies. This week I'm working on stewarding our transition to QuickBooks accounting software, which is going to be a huge improvement in terms of how we can review financial data in real time and make decisions based on that data. So that's one thing I'm doing this week. But yesterday I taped a video spot for Edmund's Rotary. So that involved some on-camera work.
Mm-hmm.
And tomorrow I'm going to be presenting for the Linwood Chamber of Commerce for their monthly Zoom breakfast. So it's really a mix of things. Like you said, it's a small organization. I'm the only staff member. And thankfully I have like a really great board and volunteers that they contribute like dozens of hours per month, and it's really astounding. But even so, I'm having to wear a lot of hats, which is really great. I learn something every day, but it's also a lot to keep track of. So I was just thinking about earlier how I would describe it. It's like for every department in like a major symphony, there's a folder on my desktop. Like I am all the departments in one. So I have to keep track of a lot of stuff, but I also get to learn a lot of stuff and do a lot of different tasks.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you have to do also as an executive director is have a relationship with the music director or the artistic director of an organization. What are some things that you really enjoy about that collaboration? What are some push and pulls, because sometimes you might have an idea in your mind of things that you want the organization to do, but the music director might have something else in mind. And then you have to work with that person to really make sure that it's a good balance, but some of your experiences doing the work that you do.
Yeah, I think I often have out of body moments actually when I work with the music director, because I've been on the other side of things. As you know, I worked for Seattle Symphony music director Ludovic Morlot for 4 years. And so I saw that kind of push-pull dynamic from outside. And so it's so interesting to like find myself in, the executive director's shoes, looking at it from the other side. And I think like there's always going to be an artistic vision that necessarily doesn't totally scale with what the organization can accomplish reasonably. And that's, that's the job of an artistic director, a music director, is to dream big and to think of these wild ideas. And that is so important. And I wouldn't ever want to tell someone who's an artistic or music director not to dream big or come up with big ideas. But there's always like, okay, how are we going to pay for that? Okay, do we have the staff time, volunteer time for that? And I really see myself, as someone who enables creative people to do their best work. Mm-hmm. And that requires really careful communication about what is possible, and also like a willingness to just go for it. Like when Michael Miropolsky said, okay, we're going to do this in our streaming virtual events this fall, or we're going to do that. It's like not comfortable necessarily always for me to say like, yeah, let's totally do that. I'm going to make it happen. It would be easier for me to just do what's easiest and most simple. But like, I really treasure those artistic personalities that push me to go out on a limb and just try something different. And, like Ludo always, would say, like, you have to take risks, and it's not always going to be perfect, but like you have to push that envelope, I think.
Yeah. And you spoke about Ludovic Morlot. I've studied with him, and he's also been on the podcast just a couple of months ago, actually. He came on and we talked about his career and what he's done. One thing I've known about you for a long time now, I had the opportunity to work with you. We collaborated on at least one concert, or two concerts, actually. Two concerts. So you're an accomplished bass player. What was that moment like when you decided that you want to do more than just play bass in an orchestra, because you went on to have get a degree in an MBA, I think, and started your work as an arts administrator. But you're still very active in the Seattle area, playing the bass with so many organizations in this area. So a little bit about that transition.
Yeah. I love playing bass in orchestras and chamber ensembles. It is my first love. I really thought that I would be a bass player. I went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and played professionally for several years after that. And one thing I noticed when I looked around, and I generally try not to make life decisions like from a fear-based mentality, is I saw that there's a need for really skilled professionals in arts management who understood things from the performer's perspective and who wanted to advocate for those musicians and performers. Because being a musician, it can be a very vulnerable place to be. Your skills aren't always valued to the degree that they should be. And I remember seeing, people who were getting by as musicians, and, really brilliantly successful players who got into a car accident and they lost their vehicle and couldn't replace it, or they had health issues and that that prevented them from playing. And it was just so heartbreaking to see really people who are much more talented and dedicated than me struggling to find a footing in a world that didn't adequately provide stability for musicians. And so I saw myself as someone who could bridge that gap and strengthen the sector with a business skill set. And so that's why I chose to go back to school and get my MBA. The other thing is there's a really good program. I just want to give a shout out to the Bolt Center for Arts Administration at University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a really amazing program, and I am so blessed to have gone through that program and to have that community and all those alumni in my life.
Wow, that's great. As a bass player, what are some composers from the past that you wish that wrote a bass concerto or something more, important for the bass, or a bass solo, or something, some kind of chamber music that included the bass? Is there a composer from the past that you wish that composed for bass?
Oh my God, I have to say Brahms.
Okay.
He's my favorite composer, in part because he's my mother's favorite composer. So I just heard that a lot. She used to play Brahms on the piano when I was growing up, and I just heard a lot of recordings of Brahms growing up. And I just wish that he had left behind like a sweet bass concerto. Can you imagine? It would be so amazing. Like, I often listen to the Brahms violin concerto and just fantasize about like learning violin just to play that piece. Of course, that'd be so much work just to play one piece. But I mean, Brahms could have made it so much easier by just writing like an equally bomb bass concerto for me.
Well, I know you have two other passions, at least two other passions that I know of. I want to hear a little bit about that, because you're constantly posting about it. I follow you on social media. You're constantly posting about these two passions, at least. And I want to hear a little bit how you got into both of them. And if you have more, I want to hear about those as well.
Yeah, I imagine you're talking about hiking and capoeira.
Yes, yes.
Well, I first got into capoeira because my stepbrother Carlos was an instructor, and he taught at UW-Madison, and I just remember like watching him, and he's just an incredibly gifted movement artist. Whatever he does, he's good at it. Actually, all of my siblings are super gifted, but he really exposed me to that art form first, and it was the gateway to a community of just amazing people who I found to be like incredibly open-minded, incredibly gifted, and actually a lot of people who are into classical music too, and languages, and just all these various other subjects that I'm interested in, and just like really kind, open-hearted people. So that, along with, bass playing and orchestra and that world, that's, where I draw the majority of my friends, and it's just incredible people. But capoeira is a Afro-Brazilian martial art that incorporates elements of dance, gymnastics, and music. So it really intersects nicely, I think, with my other musical pursuits. And it gave me an outlet that was so different from the orchestra world that I feel like if things were not, there's always ups and downs in every career, but if I wasn't feeling totally satisfied with playing for whatever reason, maybe there was a frustration, I couldn't play a piece or what have you, I felt like I could always go to capoeira and vice versa. And then more recently, you mentioned hiking. When I moved to Seattle in 2015, I didn't realize just how amazing the natural world around Puget Sound and in Washington State, and really the entire Pacific Northwest. And I discovered in 2016, when I went on my first hike, a friend invited me, and I fell in love with the outdoors. And I couldn't live without it now. It's become an obsession and and something that really rejuvenates me, going on hikes, and that's why it was, this kind of probably dates the podcast interview. Why the wildfire smoke, in addition to being so heartbreaking from an environmental standpoint, it's so hard being indoors.
Yeah, yeah. What is your most treasured possession, if there is one?
Well, I think I'm going to go with the obvious one, my bass.
Uh-huh.
And it came to me 2 years ago. I bought it at Robertson Violin in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I stayed with the mother of Anna Edwards, who's super amazing leader and conductor in the Seattle area. Her mother, Jan, lives in Albuquerque. Anna's from Albuquerque. I actually stayed with Jan when I went bass shopping there. And it was just, she showed me around, and she's just an incredible person. And it was just a wonderful trip, and I really treasure that memory. So the bass, is infused with not only like these incredible sounds and capabilities, but these memories from shopping for it and finally finding that dream instrument.
Yeah, you're such a positive person. You're so relaxed about things. I can't imagine you having any frustrations. If you don't mind sharing, do you ever have any frustrations of anything, whether it's musical or non-musical?
I definitely have frustrations. I'm really frustrated about the state of the arts in our country, and particularly in my home state of Wisconsin. They're actually 50th in the nation in public arts funding, and so it's really hard seeing colleagues, during this time, during these extraordinary times, losing their jobs, or being hurt, losing income. It's really tough to see that. And I think that the public support for the arts needs to increase, if we value the arts. And, everyone watches Netflix, everyone watches movies, everyone listens to music. I just think there's a disconnect sometimes when you say the arts. People think something exclusive. It's like, no, every single person benefits from arts funding. So I think that's a frustration. I think I definitely get frustrated in my work sometimes when I don't know how to like push through on a project, when I don't have the skills that I need to get from point A to point, well, I would say point B, but really it's like usually point Y. You know what I mean? Just being incredibly complex projects. I think I sometimes get frustrated with my own, like having to have patience with myself as I'm learning something new, and I just automatically want to skip to the end. And actually, my bass teacher, Travis Gore, who's a bass player with Seattle Symphony, will tell me this sometimes, like, you just have to do the work. Like, you just have to do the work and keep going, and don't stop and get frustrated. And so I see a lot of parallels between my musical pursuits and practicing and trying to hone my skills, and like gaining skills in administration or in non-musical pursuits. And so like what studying music has brought to me is like an appreciation for your brain is just going to learn, like, if you keep doing the work. And sometimes it's not as quick as like you would like it to be, but if you just keep plugging away, eventually the neurons are just going to light up in the right sequence and you'll get it. So I think my frustrations usually lie in like not having patience.
I think many people will relate. One question that's been a standard, at least for the past 50 or more episodes, is a life-changing moment. The people who listen to this podcast know that this is coming. For the past couple of dozen guests, I've been asking a life-changing moment that's a personal life-changing moment and also professional, maybe related to your music career, if you don't mind sharing.
Well, I can say as far as like professional life-changing moments, I think everything changed for me. Everything fell into alignment. I think when I got hired by Seattle Symphony to be Ludovic Morlot's assistant, I remember interviewing him via Skype, and I was still living in Madison, Wisconsin at the time. And that morning, I was really, and I've never told Ludo this story. So, Ludo, if you're listening, this is what happened. I was actually having a really rough morning. I hadn't slept well, and I was like, oh, maybe I should just cancel. Maybe this job isn't right for me. I'm not qualified. You know, what am I thinking? Working for this music director. What am I thinking? Like moving across the country alone, like this is crazy. And I was in a really bad mood. And I think Ludo maybe was running a few minutes behind for whatever reason. I really thought about like just saying, I'm not doing this. But then something in me was like, okay, just, you know, have a conversation, see what you can learn. And we had a conversation and it just like, it totally clicked. And I was feeling like, okay, this is so in alignment with what I want to do and my aspirations. And I was just so energized by that conversation that I left the Zoom, or maybe it was Skype, whichever like telecommunications company I want to plug. I left that conversation and I was like, I felt like I was bouncing off the walls. And I was staying with a retired couple, both of them researchers at UW-Madison at the time. And they just looked at me like, what just happened? And it was like word salad. Like I described to them our conversation and that I felt really energized by it. And they're like, well, that's a good sign. You should, you know, if they offer it to you, you should take it. And eventually they did, and I did.
Wow. That's amazing. Any stories that, again, I'm sure there's so many stories with Ludo that you might not be able to share, but are there any stories that come to mind that were fun moments or maybe stressful moments that you're willing to share on the podcast on record?
Well, I'm just gonna like put it out there and you can edit it out if I say something that I'm embarrassed about or think you would be embarrassed about. I think the Music Beyond Borders concert, it was in protest of our 45th president's ban on travelers from Muslim countries. And so Seattle Symphony at very short notice put together a free concert with music from composers from those banned countries. And it was really something special. And Ludo asked me to play in that concert. So I got to sit in at the back of the bass section and just totally humbled by that section. It's one of the best bass sections out there, period. And just like being able to work with him and with Pablo, that was a highlight. As far as like stories about Ludo, I think something I will share is, you know, I think his public persona is like very kind, very like nice and very considerate. And I will say that behind closed doors, he is exactly the same way. So, and you know this as well. I think, you know, a lot of conductors maybe are a bit more spitfire in their approach, to put it mildly. And I think Ludo is like consistently the same person, whether it's, in public or in a, in-person conversation. And that was like something that was particularly inspiring for me, and how I try to pattern my leadership style is off of that pattern of interaction and really like respect. I think there are definitely times when he and I disagreed, or he disagreed with someone else, but I'm trying to think of any other stories. Oh, I mean, when Seattle Symphony got a gift from Taylor Swift, I remember that, and Taylor Swift heard Become Ocean by John Luther Adams, and she gave $50,000 to Seattle Symphony, saying that, listening to the piece on a trans-Pacific flight, that it had reminded her of her grandmother and going to the opera. And I think that was a really special moment for Ludo and for the orchestra. One story that comes to mind about Ludo is we had a high school student who was job shadowing a friend of mine and a colleague at Seattle Symphony one day. And she was upstairs in the office. As you know, at Benaroya Hall, the offices are upstairs and on the 5th floor, and the orchestra rehearsals on the stage are on the 2nd floor. And this particular student was a huge fan of Ludo. Like, she just loved Ludo so much, and she told my colleague about it. And somehow through the grapevine, I think he told me, because of my job, he said, oh, this high school student, she just like thinks Ludo's the best. She's so inspired by him, artistically. And, isn't that adorable? And I said, yeah. And then I mentioned it to Ludo and said, do you want to just pop upstairs and like just say hello, and that you appreciate her, being a fan, and encourage her in her musical studies, what have you. And so he agreed to do it, which I think was just so generous, because like his days were just so packed, from morning to evening. I remember there are times where there was like almost no break, by design, and just like packing these meetings in. And but he agreed to go upstairs and meet her, and her reaction was complete befuddlement and amazement, and just like the most joyful reaction ever. And he, asked her about her musical studies. He signed a CD for her, and like they chatted for a while, and then he went downstairs, and like I think on the walk downstairs, he turned to me, he's like, is there anyone like in the world that you would react to that way? And I was like, I don't know, I have to think about that. And I asked him, like, what about you? And he was like, oh, Roger Federer. If I met him, I would probably have that reaction. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And later I heard from my colleague that this particular student, who's just an amazingly talented young person, she was still like excited about it and talking about it 10-15 minutes later. Like, it just like made her month. So it was like that kind of like little act of kindness and care, I think, that came to be so like common, I think, in my work with Ludo and interaction with the public with him. I think I really enjoy reflecting on those 4 years and everything that I learned. And I still have a lot of processing to do, because I just kind of jumped into a new opportunity. So this kind of highlights the need for me to like actually think about some of those experiences in more depth.
Those are all great moments. As a bass player, what is one artist currently living that you would love to jam with, play with, collaborate with, no matter what genre? I mean, it could be any genre. It could be from rock to hip hop to pop or classical. Any artist that you're, really love what they're doing, you would want to collaborate with them playing, or even if it's just a jam session.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to actually pull out my Spotify playlist.
Uh-huh. And tell us every artist on there.
Yeah. Oh, well, more recently, Christine and the Queens,
Mm-hmm.
just incredible, charismatic pop artist. Constantinople,
Mm-hmm.
I've been really enjoying them. Uh, and they collaborate with a lot of different artists outside of Western classical music, which is great. Emily King is a favorite of mine. I always come back to her. She's a New York-based singer-songwriter, and she kind of writes songs kind of in the American songbook
Mm-hmm.
vein. They just feel like instantly classic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Edgar Meyer is a huge hero of mine. He's a bass player. He's collaborated with Yo-Yo Ma and Chris Thile and all these other incredible artists. And really, when I was like in high school, and I was awakening to what the bass could do, he was so inspirational to me in awakening this concept of the capabilities of the instrument and what could be expressed. Formerly I thought like maybe I'm just going to be relegated to oompas for the rest of my life, but he really awakened that creativity. And so I would love to collaborate with him, even though I would just feel like a 5-year-old kid plucking my bass next to such a genius.
Yeah. That's great. A couple more questions. What is your perfect idea of happiness?
So many. I think it's that moment, and maybe you've experienced this as well. That moment when you're playing in an orchestra or in a section and everything just comes together and you behave as one organism. There's that. And then I think being in the wilderness, in the mountains, in the woods, um, in the Pacific Northwest, like that is heavenly to me. And then if you want to connect that to my other passion, which is capoeira, I would say just like a really good game. We don't call like two people sparring. We call it a game.
Mm-hmm.
Like a really good game where you lose yourself and you forget where you are, and like space and time have no meaning, and you just are totally flowing and just reacting to the other player, and everything comes together. And I would say those moments are rare, but they're so worth the effort.
Yeah. One thing about capoeira that I didn't know till, I follow a lot of Brazilian martial artists, and quite a few of them have studied capoeira. One thing I didn't know, because I always thought of capoeira, of course, it's a martial arts, it's dance, it's music. So I thought of it as more of an art form than kind of a martial arts. But then I realized there's belts, which is more associated, or at least something to do with belts, stripes or something. I'm not sure. Is it belts, or are there belts just like in martial arts? I thought there was.
We have chords. So
Mhm.
we have a chord system that starts with typically a white chord
Mhm.
or a raw chord, and progresses all the way up to red, which is a mestre.
Mhm.
And it's no, not putting down karate by saying this. It is a lot slower process
Uh,
to get through the belt or through the chord system in capoeira.
mhm.
Um, Typically, a mestre studied for about 30 years.
Wow. So one of my favorite athletes from Brazil, he has a yellow cord. What does that mean? He's done it for like 10, 15 years. I think it's yellow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it really depends. Different schools have different systems. In my school, yellow would be not novice, but you've been around for a couple years.
Okay.
So I'm currently a blue-orange chord, which is like, it goes, in my school at least, white or raw, yellow, orange, and then blue with half chords in between. But it really depends on the school that you're in. And some schools, the highest chord is actually white or raw.
Wow.
And it kind of symbolizes, that humility, I think, of, you've progressed all the way through the chord system and now you're just a raw chord again.
Rose, with all your experience as an administrative leader, as a bass player, accomplished bass player, what advice would you give to young musicians pursuing a career in music?
I would say just keep doing it. Keep doing things, whether it's practicing or developing your business skills. Don't be afraid. Like, try anything. Try different things. Try different genres. Just keep doing the work. I think at least, I focus so much on that accolade or that achievement or like winning that audition. And I think to be content and to find some sort of like stability or sustainability in your career, you have to really focus on incremental progress and not like focus on the task at hand and doing a little bit each day, and don't be afraid to try something and fail. Something that I see in myself and in a lot of classical musicians is the need to be perfect. And yes, when you're playing that audition excerpt for the panel that's going to grant you a job or not, then you want to be as close to perfect as possible. But that mentality, it's not really realistic in your day-to-day life. And I think it can cause a lot of mental blocks for people where they feel like, okay, every single performance has to be perfect. And I'm just terrible things are going to happen if it's not right. Or I'm not going to try this other avenue, even though I'm interested in it, because I'm going to be a beginner and it's going to be not perfect. And I'm just going to like fail. And to them, I say, like, I've got news for you. 9 out of 10 times you will fail. And that's okay. That's part of the process. So just don't be afraid to fail repeatedly in pursuit of your dream. And don't be afraid to explore other avenues for nourishment, both artistically and spiritually and in your relationships, because music can be like the common thread in your life. It cannot be your whole life. And if you rely on it for all of the meaning in your life, then you're going to be very, very sad. So I think just like plugging away and not being afraid to take risks and try new things, that's what I would encourage young musicians to do.
Thank you, Rose. That was perfect. Thank you so much. Anything else you want to add before we end?
Just that I'm so excited to talk with you and connect with you, Tigran. And I hope you're doing well. I hope your family's well. And thank you so much to you and to the listeners for having me on.
It's been great, Rose. Thank you so much. I hope we collaborate again soon.
I hope so too.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.